Alicia Gray is having a word with someone in the crowd, and now security is also involved.
It looks like that fan is being
It's clear to us the WNBA does not appreciate fans, don't want us there. We have been thrown out of games for a multitude of ridiculous things. We have watched these players complain and trash us all. They called half of us racist. They've called all types of stuff. All types of stuff. Now, without Caitlin Clark, the viewership has been cut in half by 50%. 50% for the playoffs. For the playoffs, y'all. And they still are getting fans thrown out of games.
She got a fan kicked out last night against the Indiana Fever, only for the fan to speak their piece to the security. Security found out, oh, you didn't say anything at all, actually. Yeah, come back to your seat. Let me just wipe that seat off for you. Here, please, have a seat, ma'am. Alicia Gray played like absolute you-know-what last night and decided to take it out on a fan.
What you're about to see is not just a player having a bad night. It's the moment an entire organization decided that when the game got too tough, the truth became optional. On live television, in the middle of a do-or-die playoff game, the Atlanta Dream, facing humiliation on their home court, decided to point the finger not at their own failures, but at the fans who paid to be there. They manufactured a crisis, orchestrated a scene, and tried to sell a lie to the world. But they made one critical mistake. They forgot the cameras were rolling, they forgot the fans had a voice, and most importantly, they forgot that the scoreboard never lies. While one team was busy trying to eject paying customers to distract from a blowout, the Indiana Fever, decimated by injuries and with their superstar Caitlin Clark in street clothes, were putting on a masterclass in heart, resilience, and what it truly means to be a professional sports team. This is the story of how a desperate lie was exposed on the brightest stage, and how a team with every excuse to fail rose from the ashes to create a moment of playoff history. The Atlanta Dream wanted to change the narrative, and they succeeded, just not in the way they planned. They exposed themselves for the entire world to see. It started subtly, a flicker of frustration from Atlanta's Alicia Gray. The Indiana Fever, a team running on fumes and prayers, were not just competing, they were dominating. Every pass from the Dream seemed a step too slow, every shot a little too forced. The energy in the building was shifting from hopeful to tense, and you could see it on the players' faces. Gray, in particular, was struggling. Shots weren't falling, defensive assignments were being missed, and the effortless confidence she usually played with had evaporated, replaced by a simmering anger. The game clock was becoming an enemy, each tick a reminder of their failure. Then it happened. During a break in play, Gray turned her head toward the stands, her eyes locking onto a section of Indiana Fever fans. Her expression wasn't one of annoyance, it was one of accusation. She pointed, a single, definitive gesture that cut through the noise of the arena. She said something to the officials, then signaled to the arena security. In that instant, the game stopped being about basketball. The cameras, unsure of what to focus on, zoomed in on Gray, then panned to the crowd where security personnel were beginning to move. A man and a woman, looking utterly bewildered, were asked to stand. They weren't yelling, they weren't being disruptive. They were simply watching the game, wearing the opposing team's colors. This was the scene Atlanta wanted. The focus was no longer on their double-digit deficit. It was on this manufactured incident, this supposed transgression from a fan that was so severe it required stopping a playoff game. The broadcast commentators were caught off guard, speculating about what could have been said. The implication was clear: a line had been crossed. The Atlanta Dream were victims. Their player had been subjected to abuse, and the fans were the villains. It was a perfectly executed piece of theater designed to garner sympathy, and, more importantly, to create an excuse for the abysmal performance unfolding on the court. While security escorted the confused couple up the stairs, the narrative began to solidify. On social media, the initial reactions were exactly what Atlanta had hoped for. Outrage directed at the unruly Fever fans. Questions about what vile thing they must have said to warrant an ejection. The Dream's strategy was working. They had successfully hijacked the conversation. But the problem with lies is that they are fragile. They require everyone to believe the same story, and in a packed arena with thousands of eyewitnesses, that's an impossible task. While the world was debating the supposed misconduct, people who were actually there, sitting just feet away from the incident, started telling a very different story. A story that didn't involve threats or slurs. A story that involved nothing more than standard, run-of-the-mill crowd chatter. The version of events that Alicia Gray and the Dream were selling to the public had a very short shelf life. They had started a fire, but they were about to find out it was one they couldn't control. The truth was already starting to seep out through the cracks in their carefully constructed narrative, and what it revealed was far more embarrassing than any loss on the scoreboard. It revealed a team so fragile, so unable to handle the pressure of the playoffs, that they would rather invent a villain in the stands than face the reality of their own shortcomings. They were losing the game, and in a desperate, pathetic attempt to save face, they were about to lose something far more valuable: their credibility. The seeds of their public humiliation had been sown, all on live television, for everyone to see. The narrative the Atlanta Dream tried to sell the world began to crumble almost immediately, not from a press release or an official league statement, but from the unfiltered, real-time accounts of the people who were actually there. On social media, the initial wave of confusion and outrage directed at the fans quickly gave way to a powerful counter-narrative. A fan who was seated just a few rows away from the incident posted a detailed account of what happened, and it was nothing like the high drama Atlanta was projecting. The story was simple, mundane, and utterly believable. During a lull in the action, Indiana's Lexi Hull was jogging back on defense, tasked with guarding Alicia Gray. The fan, a man in a black hat, saw an opportunity to encourage a player on his team. He cupped his hands and yelled, not at Gray, but to Hull, "You're good, Lex. She's not even trying anymore." It was a comment born from observation. Gray's effort level had visibly dropped. She was jogging when she should have been sprinting. Her body language screamed defeat, and the fan was simply telling his team's player to take advantage of it. It was the kind of comment you hear 1,000 times in any sports arena in the country. It wasn't a slur. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't personal harassment. It was a fan talking about the game, to a player on the team he was cheering for. But for Alicia Gray, who was in the midst of a disastrous performance, that simple observation was apparently too much to bear. According to eyewitnesses, she snapped. She stopped, turned, and allegedly unleashed a string of obscenities at the fan and the people sitting near him. She was the one who escalated the situation. She was the one who turned a simple, in-game comment into a personal confrontation. And then, she played the victim, pointing to security as if she had been the one wrong. The security team, following protocol, responded to the player's complaint. They approached the fans, who explained, calmly and rationally, exactly what had been said. And this is the moment the entire charade fell apart. This is the smoking gun. After hearing the fans' side of the story, and likely corroborating it with others sitting nearby, the security staff did something that almost never happens in these situations. They didn't just tell the fans to leave. They didn't issue a warning. Instead, they reportedly apologized to the couple and escorted them right back to their seats. Let that sink in. The arena's own security personnel, the neutral arbiters in this situation, investigated the claim and concluded that the player, not the fan, was in the wrong. They reversed the ejection. This single act was a complete and utter repudiation of Alicia Gray's complaint. It was a public declaration that her accusation was baseless. The Dream's attempt to create a distraction had backfired in the most spectacular way possible. They weren't just exposed, they were embarrassed by the very people tasked with enforcing the rules. The optics were catastrophic. It painted a picture of a player so mentally fragile that she couldn't handle the slightest bit of criticism. A player who would rather lie and have a paying customer removed than accept the reality of her own poor play. and her play was, by any measure, terrible. She finished the night with a stat line that screamed frustration, just a handful of points on dismal shooting from the field. She was a non-factor, completely outplayed by a hungrier, more determined Indiana team. Her outburst wasn't a righteous stand against fan abuse. It was a temper tantrum from a player who was getting dominated on her home floor. This incident couldn't have come at a worse time for the league. The WNBA was in the midst of the Caitlin Clark boom. Ratings were soaring, ticket sales were at an all-time high, and a whole new demographic of fans was tuning in for the first time, drawn by the excitement Clark generated. And what was their first taste of the WNBA playoffs? A star player on a primetime game getting fans ejected for no reason, only for the story to be exposed as a lie minutes later. It reinforced the worst stereotypes that critics of the league have pushed for years, that the players are unprofessional and hostile to the very fans they need to attract. With Caitlin Clark sidelined due to injury, the playoff viewership had already taken a significant hit, a stark reminder of how much the league's newfound popularity rested on her shoulders. For players on other teams to then actively antagonize this new fan base, the very people keeping the lights on, was an act of stunning self-sabotage. It sent a clear message to those new fans: we don't want you here. Your support doesn't matter unless it's silent and unconditional. Allisha Gray wasn't just taking her frustration out on one fan. She was giving a middle finger to the entire movement that was elevating her sport to new heights. The lie had been busted, the truth was out, and the Atlanta Dream were left to face a far bigger problem than just a playoff loss. They now had a credibility crisis, a public relations nightmare, and a starring role in a cautionary tale about what happens when professional athletes forget who they play for. But while the Atlanta Dream were imploding in a blaze of fabricated drama and public relations disasters, a completely different story was unfolding on the Indiana Fever's bench. A story of character, of unity, and of a team refusing to die. To understand the magnitude of what the Fever accomplished that night, you have to understand the situation they were in. They weren't just short-handed, they were a shell of their former selves. Their superstar, Caitlin Clark, the generational talent who had single-handedly rewritten the league's record books for viewership and attendance, was out for the season with an injury. This alone should have been a death sentence. She was the engine of their offense, the focal point of every defensive scheme, the player who created open looks for everyone else. But the carnage didn't stop there. Sophie Cunningham, their veteran sharpshooter and emotional leader, was unavailable. Sydney Coulson and Chloe Bibby, key rotational pieces, were also sidelined. It was a roster decimated by injuries, a team that had every excuse to roll over and accept their fate. The script was already written. The Fever, without Clark, would put up a valiant but ultimately futile effort before their season came to a quiet end. But no one gave that script to Indiana. In the pre-game shoot-around, Coach Stephanie White spoke about the need for desperation, for a sense of urgency on every single possession. She knew talk was cheap. What she needed was a team that would translate those words into action, a team that would fight for every loose ball, contest every shot, and believe they could win when no one else did. And that belief started with the very player they were supposed to be lost without. On the bench, Caitlin Clark was not a picture of dejection. She wasn't sulking over her injury or detached from the game. She was the team's most energetic cheerleader. She was on her feet for every defensive stop, her fists pumping in the air. She was the first one to greet her teammates during timeouts, offering encouragement and advice. She was smiling, she was engaged, she was a leader in every sense of the word, even without her uniform on. Her energy was infectious. It radiated from the bench onto the court, a visible reminder to her team of what they were playing for. They weren't just playing to extend their season, they were playing for her. They were playing to prove that the culture they had built was stronger than any single injury. That display of selfless leadership stood in stark, glaring contrast to the petulance and fragility on display from the Atlanta sideline. While Allisha Gray was complaining to the refs about fans, Caitlin Clark was coaching up her teammates. While the Dream were looking for excuses, the Fever were looking for solutions. And they found them in the players who stepped out of the shadows and into the spotlight. Kelsey Mitchell, the veteran guard, played with the fire of a leader who knew this was her moment. She put the offense on her back, attacking the rim with a fearless aggression that sent a clear message: we will not be intimidated. She drained clutch three-pointers that felt like daggers, stopping any hint of an Atlanta run before it could even begin. She was the steady hand, the calming presence that guided them through the storm. In the paint, Aaliyah Boston was a force of nature. She put on a clinic of post moves, using her strength and impeccable footwork to dominate Atlanta's bigs. Every time Indiana needed a basket to silence the crowd, they went to Boston, and time again, she delivered. She was the anchor, the unmovable object around which the entire team revolved. But this victory wasn't just about the stars. It was about the role players who embraced the next woman up mentality. It was about Natasha Howard, who may not have filled the stat sheet, but whose defensive intensity was suffocating. She altered shots, fought for rebounds, and did all the dirty work that doesn't show up in the box score but is essential to winning. It was about Lexi Hull, the very player the fan had been encouraging, who played with a relentless energy, diving for loose balls and hitting timely shots that stretched the floor. And it was about rookie Michaela Timpson, who came off the bench and provided a shocking spark, scoring crucial points with a composure that defied her experience. Then came the moment. Late in the third quarter, the game still hung in the balance. Atlanta was clinging to hope, needing just one run to get back in it. Aaliyah Boston muscled her way to a tough score inside. Before Atlanta could even process it, the Fever's defense forced a turnover, a steal that sent a jolt of electricity through the arena. The ball swung around the perimeter, finding its way to Lexi Hull in the corner as the shot clock expired. She launched a deep three at the buzzer. The arena held its breath. Swish. The crowd erupted. In that single sequence, a display of interior dominance, defensive tenacity, and clutch outside shooting, the will of the Atlanta Dream was broken. You could see it in their body language. Shoulders slumped. Heads dropped. They knew it was over. The Fever had absorbed their best punch and had come back stronger. That wasn't just a basketball game anymore. It was a statement. It was a declaration from a team that had been left for dead, a team that proved to the world that heart and unity could triumph over any adversity. When the final horn mercifully sounded, the scoreboard glowed with the undeniable truth, a silent, digital judge that had rendered its verdict. 77-60. It was more than a final score. It was a public refutation of every excuse the Atlanta Dream had tried to build. While their players were busy pointing fingers at the crowd, the Indiana Fever were busy pointing at the scoreboard. There was no room for interpretation, no possibility of a spin. It was a demolition, a comprehensive victory of character over collapse, of integrity over insincerity. The aftermath was immediate and brutal. The court of public opinion, which the Dream had so arrogantly tried to manipulate, delivered a sentence far harsher than any playoff loss. The clips of the incident went viral, but it wasn't the initial accusation that captured the world's attention. It was the footage of the fans being apologized to and escorted back to their seats. That was the moment that sealed Atlanta's fate. The narrative was no longer a mystery, it was a meme. Alicia Gray and the Atlanta Dream became a case study in how to lose with zero grace. They were roasted on social media, criticized by commentators, and held up as an example of the exact kind of player fragility that turns casual fans away from the sport. The lie they had told wasn't just exposed, it was ridiculed. Meanwhile, the Indiana Fever were being celebrated as national heroes. Their story was the polar opposite. They were the embodiment of toughness, a team that had faced legitimate, season-altering adversity and had not flinched. They didn't make excuses, they made plays. They didn't blame others, they trusted each other. The contrast was so perfect, so poetically just, that it felt like something out of a Hollywood script. On one side, a team that crumbled under the pressure and tried to take it out on a fan. On the other, a team that had lost its superstar but found its soul. This brings us back to the unspoken specter hanging over the entire affair, Caitlin Clark. The Dream's behavior was an indirect insult to the very standard of professionalism she represents. She had spent the entire season facing unprecedented media pressure, physical defense, and intense scrutiny, all while carrying herself with a composure that belied her age. Then, in her absence, a veteran player on an opposing team couldn't handle a stray comment from the crowd. The juxtaposition was damning. Now, all eyes turned to Game 3 in Atlanta. The stakes have been irrevocably altered. This is no longer just a deciding game, it is a referendum on character. The pressure has completely shifted. The Indiana Fever, having already achieved the impossible, will play with a freedom and confidence that makes them incredibly dangerous. They have nothing to lose and everything to prove. The Atlanta Dream, however, will walk onto their home court carrying the weight of their own disgrace. They will be playing in front of a home crowd that now knows their team cracks under pressure. They will be facing an opponent they now know they cannot intimidate or outwork. They are the ones with everything on the line, their season, their reputation, and whatever shred of dignity they have left. But regardless of the outcome of that final game, the true victory has already been won. Years from now, no one will remember the specifics of Alicia Gray's complaint. It will fade into the footnotes of a forgotten playoff series. But what will be remembered is the night a battered, bruised, and forgotten Indiana Fever team, with their backs against the wall, stared down adversity and did not blink. They taught the league a valuable lesson, that while lies and distractions are temporary, character is permanent. The scoreboard is final. This one wasn't just about advancing to the next round. It was about forging an identity. It proved to the world, and more importantly to themselves, that the Indiana Fever are not defined by one player. They are defined by a culture of resilience, a collective toughness that resides in every single player in that locker room. They took a moment that should have been their breaking point and turned it into their finest hour. The Atlanta Dream were busted on live TV for all to see, but the real story, the one that will endure, is how the Indiana Fever used that moment to show everyone what true champions are made of.